When we start Theme Thursdays, for those of you that are commonly tuning into these, you know we start with an overture about the theme, and today's theme is consistency. So, in thinking about consistency, a statement that I would think that would represent the theme is that I think it actually used to be called fairness back in the day. If you have one of the very early books like Now Discover Your Strengths, so the name actually changed. A good name though to ascribe to it. But I think it's about just a keen awareness about the need to treat people the same by setting clear rules and really applying them even-handedly across a group so that you can achieve group efficiency. It's kind of about a group and fairness and sameness, less about individuals. So that's when I think of it at a real high level. If I try and dive deep into thinking about words that I think represent the notion of consistency, the theme of consistency, I think of uniformity. I think about rules. I think about efficiency, really the kind of the point of it. I think of a balance. You know, if you've got one thing on one side that's the same as something on the other side, you really are in balance. I think of somebody with consistency as being sort of the conscience of a group for people. If I start going to the place where I think of adjectives, how I would describe someone, I think of words like egalitarian, even-handed, selfless, really, because it's about a group. It's not about an individual. So it's less about a rule that's applied differently to yourself than others. So it's about otherness, I guess. Orderly comes to mind. Fair, the theme name used to be. I think that's a really good way to think about the notion and the high ground of consistency. Consistency also has people that are pretty predictable, equitable. So those are a lot of the individual words that I think of when I think of the concept and the theme of consistency. I have to admit right now I'm going to say out loud that I have consistency envy for someone like Audra because it's 31 of 34 for me, so it's something I have to reach really deeply and to get any of that to come onto my place. So I'd rather partner with someone like Audra to get there. When we think of the themes, and those of you that have been at this for a while know that we talk about domains. So we cluster the individual themes into bigger groups. And when we think about the domain where this one actually fits, it's in our executing bucket. And I think it's firmly in the executing bucket. It's how people get things done. So they get things done in that fair, consistent, equitable, applying rules consistently way. I'm seeing Audra on my screen shake her head yes, that it's resonating with her. This theme is pretty rare, actually. Not quite as rare as it is on my list, but overall, if you look at the entire database, it comes out at 25th of the 34 themes. And if you dice and slice the database differently, it's a little bit different if you look at how the theme rolls in the US versus internationally. And it shows up in the global database, it shows up 11% of the time. But if you look at the US database, which is right at this point a pretty large percentage of the database, it moves up to 12% of the time, which moves it from 25th to 20th place. So it's moving more toward the middle. If you then think about, okay, what does that mean on the international base? It's even rarer internationally. It only shows up 9% of the time in people's top 5. So it's very, very rare. So if you think about if you're in a position where you're coaching someone that has this consistency theme, I think you should treasure these people, right? They're pretty rare. So what a high consistency person has to bring to the party is not easily accessible from just the population at large in general. If you look at the male-female split, it shows up quite differently. It drops to 26th on the list of male themes, which means that it moves up to the midpoint, the 17th place on the list for women. So it's much more common to find it in women than it is to find it in men. So yeah, that's interesting and unusual. And I was kind of going through my head about, Why would that be? Why would that show up? And I don't have a good answer to that. So coaches, when you're thinking about that, maybe you have a really good, or Audra, when we get there, I know it's not what we talked about thinking about, but I wonder why. Or maybe Jim, you do these all the time. If you have a thought about the why behind that, it would be interesting. A lot of times things make, oh, well, obviously it's this kind of attribute and this is why, but I don't understand the why behind that one. If you think about it from a different perspective, leaders, right? We all work with leaders. Either we work for leaders or we're coaching leaders. But from a leadership perspective, the things that consistency can bring to the party from a leader's point of view is that they can really offer stability to their team, their group, their organization by leading from the place of following the same rules as everyone else. They don't tend to put themselves above everyone else. The rules are the rules. And what that does is that it really lends, I think, stability to teams and groups and the troops, right, in times of change, to know that the leaders are kind of the same as everyone else. And they're also really good at, and I actually heard yesterday, Audra, when you were talking about what you do and how you work in your job, uh, they are really good at, since the rules are the same for everyone, uh, giving credit where credit is due. Right? They're able, if the rules are applied universally the same as everyone else, if someone excels, it's easy to tell that that person is excelling. And so there's a lot of really appropriate and completely understood credit attribution by leaders that have high consistency. When I think about, we talk about balconies and basements of themes. We talk about mature states and raw states of a theme. If I think about that balcony or the mature version of consistency, I think of people that are incredibly efficient, and they get to a really successful place through even-handed predictability. I think is what I think of when I think of highly consistent people that are using it for good. If I think about the basement of the theme, where it's kind of in that raw, that unrefined state, right? Then the rules kind of get in the way of, or trump. They can trump relationships. They can trump results. Sometimes these people with really high consistency are considered rigid people, right? So in that sense, they need to work on that a little bit and mature it. When we compare and contrast themes, since we're pretty far down the path of talking through a lot about of these themes on Theme Thursdays, some of the themes that come up in the contrast bucket, I think individualization is almost, when you think of the people part of it, on in a different place. So figuring out how those two go together would be really interesting and unique. But the consistency is fair. It defines fair by treating people the same. Individualization considers fairness by treating individuals differently because they're different people, right? They both equal fair, but they get there in very different ways. So compare, contrast. If I think of the notion of consistency from a how standpoint and compare, contrast, I think you can look at consistency and adaptability in different places, right? So consistency, when you look at the process, like sameness. Adaptability, when you look at process, really does well with processes that change. If you think about a metaphor maybe for it, you could think of consistency. People really like merry-go-rounds, entertaining, but it's the sameness that makes them feel good. Adaptability, people like roller coasters that go up and down. When I think of a really great application of consistency, I think of golf swings, right? I think of way back getting early golf training, right? That my coach would say over and over again, right? The more consistent I can make my swing, if I have the same swing that when I use my putter as when I'm using my driver, right? It's just a little bit different volume for the same swing over time, that my golf game would be better. So consistency would drive and deliver excellence. So that's a personal application of where consistency would show up and help. I don't know about you all. One of my favorite gurus, motivational speakers, is Tony Robbins. I just love Tony Robbins. I mean, some people want to throw up when they think about him, but I don't. I love Tony Robbins. But he said something that I think is very germane and appropriate to this. He said that it's not that what we do once in a while that shapes our lives. It's what we do consistently. Right. So if you think about the holistic application of consistency, I think that's a pretty big ask or a pretty big charge or challenge. Anyway, so that's sort of the overture when I think of consistency, what I think of and what resonated with me.